Lecture 3, Feelings and Motivated Actions. Now, in the first two lectures, I was busy building bridges. In the first lecture, I was talking about the relationship of science and the humanities, showing that, yes, on the surface they look separate, but really they're quite related. They can influence and nourish each other. In the second lecture, I was talking about the challenges that we face as psychologists and researchers, building bridges between everyday life experiences and the worlds people live in, on the one hand, and the kind of theorization and research that we do on the other. I talked about ecological validity. The work that we do in psychology and in our laboratory has to have a meaningful relationship to events in everyday life, whether we're talking about psychology or the arts. In this third lecture, I'm going to build a bridge between two approaches to emotion theory, two complementary approaches to emotion theory. On the one hand, we're motivated to act and adapt to the challenges that we face in everyday life and to fulfill our needs and desires. In a certain sense, this is a very Darwinian kind of lecture. On the other hand, we're overcome by emotional experiences in personal or socially meaningful situations. This lecture is about adaptation and action. Lecture 4 will be about emotional experiences that we have in powerful situations, but they should be seen as related. Now, how do the mind and body interact when a person is motivated to adapt and engage in action? This emphasis on goals, planning, and action is a dominant theme in current academic circles in psychology. Now, a good way to interact with my lecture is to call up an episode from your own life, to review it in your mind, in which you were engaging in action related to goals and performance. Could be a sports experience, could be an academic experience, preparing for an exam or presenting in a seminar, but I want you to call something like that up, and then you can put it in context, see it in relation to the kind of dynamics that I'm going to describe. Now, what I want to do here is review principles that underlie action in everyday life, purposive action in everyday life. As I've said, in these adaptive episodes or action episodes, what we're trying to do is address challenges that we face in a situation, unexpected challenges. You could have been planning to go in one direction, but the door is blocked. How do I switch careers? How do I switch relationships? How do I deal with challenges? To fulfill goals and resolve needs. Well, a critical concept here is that of appraisal. We appraise the situation as good or bad for us. Will I achieve my goal? Does it have hope? Or are there roadblocks? Crucial to this is the idea that these appraisals are conducted in a very detached manner. So when we do this, in a certain sense, this analytical mind is dissociated from or separated from the body. And that's an important theme in today's lecture. The mind logically analyzes the situation to decide the best course of action. Experience, practice, and heuristics, rules of thumb, can make this kind of mental activity easier. It's what we call in psychology a top-down process. The abstract mind, the planful mind, affecting lower-level decisions. What is the body doing in this dissociated situation where the mind is logically analyzing and the body is providing a source of arousal or excitation? It provides the energy that helps us focus our attention so actions can unfold in a smooth and effective manner. We need a moderate level of excitation because too much or too little gets in the way of clear thinking and proper execution. Imagine an exam and you've taken unending number of no-dose pills or something to speed you up, or had too many coffees. And all the options look good because you can't get it straight, you can't think clearly. Or you're driving after pulling an all-nighter, and you can't quite decide whether you turn here or there, am I in this lane or that lane? Gut feelings provide a sense for our judgment about the situation. For example, pleasant and unpleasant feelings can reflect our judgments. Is this good or bad for me? Does it feel right or not? They provide feedback as well about how our actions are being undertaken. Does this feel like I'm really doing this right, or does it feel wrong? Feel being the operative term. In a military context, or a hunting context, or being lost in the woods context, we can get a sense that following a particular path is the right way or the wrong way. And what does it mean when we do that? What it means is that our mind is making kinds of analyses of situations, and we get a feeling. Feelings are the shadow of cognition because they monitor our decisions and our related actions. The body gets a sense for the situation and how it's unfolding before the mind can explain why. It's a very important point. The more experienced you are, the more these gut feelings can give you wise counsel about how to undertake your actions. Now, it's also important to note that when we are engaging in planful actions, when we are adapting, when we are purposive, there's also the active inhibition of emotional reactions so they don't get in the way. We all have friends who in situations of stress or ourselves become too emotional, and we know we have to set it aside because it's having a deleterious effect on our judgment. But when we inhibit our emotions, we can also pay a price. See? Because this kind of suppression that we're aware of, or repression that happens automatically, can spill over into symptoms that present in other sides of our life. Emotions can transform into symptoms. And we have a trade-off between expression and inhibition. The more we inhibit ourselves, the more that we can have an ulcer, for example. Remember that this is a very rational and mechanical process that I'm describing. In its extreme, we're talking about the type A person who is purpose and goal-oriented, action-oriented, achievement-oriented, outcome above all. But we know that they pay a price because while focusing on action, they're forgetting perhaps the emotional world of people around them or of their own. So that's the action model. Mind is separated from body. Emotion is inhibited. We want to be very rational. The body provides energy and helps us focus. There's a historical tradition associated with this in Western psychology. And I'm going back 300 years to the British establishment and Enlightenment. The focus there in the Enlightenment was on the, quote, moral regulation of human behavior, where the word moral has to be underscored. Passions had been associated with earlier religious ideas about what governed or interfered moral behavior. Passions could overcome us. And interestingly, before we began to speak about emotions as a regular construct in the 1700s, good and bad were seen as qualities in the world, religiously tinged qualities in the world, moral qualities in the world. Emotion was seen as a disturbance of the mind, which could interfere with proper moral behavior. They can get in the way of behaving rationally and willfully. Here you see how the action model has a philosophical history. Now, this approach, these ideas, reflect an emerging industrial society in which calm desires, follow natural laws so that willpower can govern actions of individuals, and the outcome could be felt and quantified. Each of these operative constructs, calm desires, natural laws, willpower, were all embedded in the theory that I just described. So individuals acted in a calculating manner to maximize benefits in accordance with cool desires. The resulting feelings of pain or pleasure provided feedback as to success or failure of actions. In the 20th century, these ideas were reflected in the area of psychology called purposive behaviorism around the 1920s. And that's a model in which we're making judgments in sequence. We have purpose, whether it's humans or rats coming to a choice point as they go down the alleyway. And later, we see this in appraisal theories of the 1960s and 1970s. Information is used in a rational manner to make decisions sequentially, all to achieve good ends and to avoid negative outcomes. In cognitive behaviorism, the formula is emotion equals cognition plus arousal. The mind that is doing the analyses and the body that's providing the energy. In the mind-body relations, as I said earlier, they're dissociated. The bodily state is above threshold, an important concept in my book, because above threshold means you notice it. You notice that you're frazzled. You notice that you have butterflies in your stomach. You notice the hyper-energetic state that you're in. It stands out, just as you notice bodily symptoms in a medical context. And because it is difficult to identify all our symptoms, they can energize us, but worry us. The experimental paradigm in psychology that goes hand in hand with this was developed by Gregorio Marañón, who was a very important physician and literary scholar in Spain in the early part of the 20th century. And he gave his patients injections of adrenaline that sped them up. And some people just felt the zzz of the adrenaline. And for other people, they had emotional experiences because they remembered people in their families who were ill or some kind of stressful situation. So giving this injection of adrenaline made a bodily state salient because you felt it. Stanley Schachter, very important psychologist, 1960s, 1970s, whose tradition has continued among a whole host of professors at the University of Toronto, for example. He gave his subjects injections of epinephrine to speed them up and looked at the process of how people make decisions about their bodily states and are influenced by people around them in comparable situations. But here's the point. The bodily state changes. We notice it. And this is part of this formula. Cognition and arousal is emotion. I'm arguing that we have cognition because of arousal and arousal because of cognition, by which I mean the analytical, problem-solving mind requires a bodily state that energizes it. And the bodily state that is there and is salient requires a mind that will look at it and make inferences about the causes. But they're separate. Logical thinking mind and symptom-providing bodily state. In the 21st century, we see this in the dominant theories associated with what's called core affect, states of pain and pleasure or arousal, and the conceptual act theory as well. These theories argue, both of them, core affect and conceptual act, that people notice bodily states and look for causes. And this is where they make a particular move regarding emotion theory. According to this logical and serial model. First, we notice bodily states that are salient. They stand out. They're above threshold. And then we identify them as emotions given the situation and the language in our culture that helps us identify them. That's the model. Bodily states are noticed. We look around for information to help us identify them. The appropriate information is used to label them as emotions of happy or sad, etc. This is a sequential or serial rational model. My criticism is this. These models do apply to an account of adapting to challenges and motivated, willful actions going back 300 years to the Enlightenment. They're about motivation. They're about action orientation, action tendencies. But to the extent that these theories derive from experimental operations like giving injections where the bodily states become aroused, they're subject to the ontological trap that I discussed in Lecture 2. In the ontological trap, we identify emotional states with operations done in the lab. It's a leap. Phenomena in the world, real emotional experience in the world, are seen as identical to certain hypothetical constructs, certain ideas in the minds of psychologists, which have all kinds of hidden assumptions. Emotions, as situated phenomena that are experienced by people, can be lost in empirical translation. So in sum, the point is this. We have a long tradition in the West that we see in Darwin, having to do with how we adapt to challenges in our environment and fulfill our goals and needs. It requires a rational strategy of the planful mind. The role of the body is to provide energy and facilitate focus. Too much energy, it's difficult to think. Too little energy, you can't do it either because you're almost unconscious. But this is not about emotion. This is about survival and adaptation. In Lecture 4, I turn to the theme of emotional experience as such. Thank you.